Hey everybody, so in this video we're going to cover the last set of disorders, and these are the schizophrenia spectrum disorders. And just as a quick reminder, we are going to have a quiz tomorrow over all of the disorders that we've learned about at the very end of class. So make sure that you've reviewed your notes on them, make sure you've read your modules and watched the videos, and then if you have any questions, bring them to class tomorrow and we're going to review all of these disorders before we take the quiz. Now, although there are several disorders in the schizophrenia spectrum and related disorder category, we're only going to focus on the schizophrenia spectrum part. So schizophrenia, this word literally means split mind. And it's not split mind in terms of like dissociative identity disorder where someone has multiple personalities, but it's more of their split from reality. So this is a severe disorder of psychosis, meaning that someone loses touch with reality. They're kind of in their own little world. How prevalent is schizophrenia? About 1% of our population is diagnosed with schizophrenia, with males being slightly more than females, and our homeless population having a higher percentage of people with schizophrenia. This makes sense because if they're undiagnosed, they sometimes lose touch with reality so much that they can't communicate, they can't hold up a job, they can't function in society like everybody else. So if you were to ask a psychologist, of all the disorders of which we've discussed so far in this unit, which is the most severe, I'd be willing to bet that most of them would say schizophrenia. So it's a very severe disorder, but also a very rare disorder. Prior to the DSM-5, schizophrenia had 4 different types. You had paranoid, undifferentiated, disorganized, and catatonic schizophrenia. Well, in this new DSM-5, there are no more categories of the disorder. It is now one spectrum. Much like how we got rid of Asperger's syndrome and just made it autism spectrum disorder, that's kind of what we're doing here with schizophrenia. There are no longer types of schizophrenia, it's just one schizophrenia spectrum disorder, and you put people on the spectrum wherever they're at in terms of their severity and the presence of symptoms. So this chart is incredibly important. You need to know all of these symptoms on both sides. Now, if someone has these symptoms, it doesn't mean they need to have all of them in order to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. They could just have some, but these are all of the possibilities. And you'll see that they're categorized into 2 groups. So you have positive and then negative symptoms. Now, just like in operant conditioning, when we talk about positive and negative reinforcement, this positive and negative doesn't mean good or bad. It means the presence of or addition and the absence of or subtraction. So let's go through these positive symptoms first. And again, this is when someone has the presence of what we say an inappropriate symptom. So this is the presence of something strange that we don't want, that's not functional, that could be dangerous, yada, 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 the 4 Ds. So the first one it's called a delusion. And a delusion is simply a false belief. And there are 2 types of delusions, and I want to show you a slide that shows the 2 types. You could have delusions of persecution, which means that you always think that someone is out to get you or that people are trying to hurt you, and we also call this paranoia. So we discussed this the other day with paranoid personality disorder. And then sometimes schizophrenics exhibit delusions of grandeur, meaning they think that they're someone who they're not. They think that they're very famous. So they could be a celebrity, they could be God. Some people think they're God or they're angels and that they could fly. This is why a lot of times schizophrenics will end up committing suicide, because they think that they can fly, they think they're Jesus, and they'll jump off of a building expecting to be able to have powers to save themselves or to fly, and then they end up falling. Here's another example of delusional thinking. If you look at this quote here, this is a quote by someone who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. It says, "This morning when I was at the Hillside Hospital, I was making a movie. I was surrounded by movie stars. I'm Mary Poppins. Is this room painted blue to get me upset? My grandmother died 4 weeks after my 18th birthday." So while this thinking is very disorganized, and we'll get to that symptom in a second, you can see here that this patient has exhibited a delusion in that they think that they are Mary Poppins. The second positive symptom is hallucinations. Now, hallucinations are just when you have a perceptual experience without any sensory input. So they can be visual or auditory for the schizophrenic patient. And more times than not, they're auditory, although some do have visual hallucinations. Visual hallucinations, they see people and they see things that aren't real, but they're very, very real to them. They could be, talking to them, shaking their hand, using hand gestures, but they're not actually touching anybody. And to us, this looks incredibly strange because we're like, there's nobody there. Who are you talking to? But they very much see somebody there. They also have auditory hallucinations in which they're hearing voices that are telling them to do things, that are, just having conversations with them. And more times than not, these voices are very negative. They might be telling the patient to hurt themselves or to hurt other people, or telling them lies in terms of like, oh, you're Jesus, you're God, go ahead and jump off this building, go ahead and, try and rob this bank because everybody's going to bow down to you because you're the celebrity. You know what I mean? It just very negative, strange beliefs. So I posted a video on my website that it's meant to show you what it's like to have these hallucinations of auditory and visual nature. So if you're interested, go on there and check it out so you can see what it's like to have a hallucination. The third positive symptom is disorganized thought and speech. So if you were to talk to a schizophrenia patient, you might not be able to understand a word that they are saying. You might ask them a very basic question like, what is your name? And they might respond with this paragraph-long answer that is all over the place and means absolutely nothing to you. So I already showed you this example, which also includes the delusion of Mary Poppins, but you can see it's also very disorganized. There's a bunch of random junk in there that has no connection whatsoever. Here's another example of disorganized speech. The intended sentence of the patient was, sometimes it feels like someone has been pounding on my head with a hammer, right? It's normal if you have a headache to say something like that. But what happens in schizophrenia are all these other words get jumbled in, and the actual spoken sentence that comes out is, sometimes it feels and smells like someone has screwed on a quarter-pound hamburger into my head and arms and legs, and if you put a headlight inside it, we'll kill you. Okay, so very different than what the intended sentence was. I've also put some videos on my website of actual patients with schizophrenia so that you can see these symptoms. So there is a video on there. I think Heather's a really good example of severely disorganized thought and speech. And then I put an example, Gerald, on there, who exhibits delusions, disorganized thought and speech, and the next positive symptom, which is odd movements and gestures. So all that means is that sometimes schizophrenics can perform these like senseless compulsive acts where they might rock back and forth for hours and hours. They might scratch at their arm for hours and hours. As you can see in Gerald's video online, he's going to sit there and twirl his hair the entire time during the conversation because that's his compulsive act. So those are all the positive symptoms, which means they are the presence of inappropriate emotion or inappropriate action. Next, we move on to the negative symptoms. So this is when you have the absence of appropriate actions or emotion. And so the first one is called the flat affect. It's not flat affect, it's flat affect. And affect actually means emotion. So flat affect means they lack emotion or they lack appropriate emotion. So there's two situations that could happen here with schizophrenics. One is that it could be a joyous, happy celebration and they show zero emotion whatsoever, or it could be a really sad occasion and they show zero emotion whatsoever, or they show the exact opposite emotion, meaning that if it's a really sad occasion like a funeral or something, they might be in the back corner cracking up and laughing hysterically. Very inappropriate emotion for that situation. Vice versa, if it's an incredibly happy situation, they might be in the corner crying their eyes out, super sad. Again, very inappropriate emotion. Another negative symptom is they have the absence of personal hygiene. Again, this goes into that homeless stereotype. Homeless people a lot of times don't have very good hygiene. Well, a large percentage of the homeless population are schizophrenics. They don't take care of their bodies. They don't bathe. They don't shower. They don't buy clothes. It's just not something that they focus on. The last negative symptom is called catatonia. And catatonia means that sometimes these schizophrenics will put their bodies into incredibly awkward positions, and they will actually hold those positions for hours upon end. Their body becomes like wax, and you can actually like move it yourself, and they'll just hold it. So I wanted to show you a picture of what that looks like here. So these are two women who are in we call it a catatonic stupor. So you can see the woman on the left here, her face is actually going to hold that position for hours, and her hand, you can see, is separated out. Then on the right, here's another example of a catatonic stupor, and you can actually go and move her arm any way you want, and she will hold it. It's very strange, but it's one of the symptoms. I also have a video online of a real woman who is in a catatonic stupor, and you can see the doctors moving her body, and she will just hold those positions. Now, one of the interesting things about catatonia is one of the indicators of schizophrenia. It doesn't mean that you're going to get it, but if you notice in childhood, sometimes there are odd movements that the children will make with their hands that can indicate future schizophrenia onset. So if you see here in this little boy, in his hand looks very similar to that woman that was in the left-hand picture just a second ago. And here as well, there's just a slight bend of the wrist that is a little abnormal that psychologists say maybe they could be developing schizophrenia in the future. In addition to the waxy-like structure of a person's limbs, they can also have parrot-like speech repetition with catatonia, meaning that they will just repeat everything that you say like a parrot. So those are all of the symptoms for the schizophrenia spectrum disorder. Now, instead of saying, well, someone has paranoid schizophrenia or catatonic schizophrenia, now we say this person is diagnosed with schizophrenia spectrum disorder with the symptoms of, and then you list whichever of these symptoms that person has. It's the same thing that we're going to do with autism now. Rather than saying this person has Asperger's disorder, we're going to say this person has autism disorder with the symptoms of blah, 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 whatever they are, okay? So hopefully you have a better understanding now of what specifically schizophrenia is. Make sure you watch those videos because they will be helpful in giving you the understanding you need. Now, what causes schizophrenia? This is going to be what your free response question is on your test. Just a reminder that your unit test over all of these modules is going to be this upcoming Friday. And so the pages in your book that describe all of the potential causes of schizophrenia, because we really don't have one that we know for sure causes it, pages 680 to 685 in your book. So you want to make sure you read over those and know them well. We will go over them in class and review it a little bit, but just to give you some free help there, that your whole free response question on Friday will be over the causes of schizophrenia. All right, well, we're done with all of the disorders. Tomorrow we're going to review them all in class and then take the quiz, so we'll see you then.